Hi class, welcome to presentation 4.2, which concerns the intellectual and cultural achievements of the Aztec region prior to the Spanish conquest in 1519 through 1521. We're going to look at the multiple calendars, their medicine, their hieroglyphic writing, their craftsmanship, and then their literature, which was in fact not written down, so it is an oral story that eventually got written down. And we'll check out how this all kind of plays out. The opening story is brought to us by Juan de Torquemada, a priest who lives and writes 2 generations after the conquest, but also Alva Ixtlilxochitl, who is an Indian noble who went to an important Indian college in Tlatelolco, ran by the Spanish priests, which was intended, by the way, to make Indian priests as part of the colonial society, which didn't happen, but it got the first generation of Indian nobles to be literate in both their own Nahuatl in a written form, and textual form, and in Spanish. So it provides a lot of insights. Sahagún is a third source for all of this. Sahagún is a Franciscan who, in a sympathetic manner, attempted to chronicle volumes and volumes of information about the Mexica in the generation after the conquest. So the opening story from these 3 main sources is about Netzahualpili. He was the Tlatoani of Texcoco, and prior to the Spanish conquest, Texcoco was the second most powerful city really in the entire valley after Tenochtitlan, and it was one of the 3 in the Aztec Triple Alliance. So what did Netzahualpili do? Why to include him? Because it demonstrates that at the very highest levels of the nobles, many of them attempted to be Tlamatinime, and this is wise men who would attempt to learn the crafts and skills of the main disciplines of their day. Again, as I did the sources first, 2 of these are from the first generation. One is Spanish, one is an Indian noble, and then the third is a Spaniard who wrote quite a bit, in addition to the other 2, about the Mexican ways, though he was a little bit more distant, so we're more cautious with his evidence. So the calendars, which if you have already read the chapter, you probably have already dominated, they have 2 or 3 depending on how you look at it. So the solar calendar, which is known as the Siwit, is 365 days, and they had 18 months of 20 days. If you haven't noticed yet, 20 is a big number in the Mexican world, in the Valley of Mexico, and 20 does demonstrate completeness, and it was, in fact, the base of their number system. For those of you who remember from your middle school or high school days when you might have looked at numbering systems and how we use a numbering system of 0 through 9, or I guess 10, but you might have a different base system. The Mexica's base was in fact 20, so they counted things in 20s and then in 20s of 20s, and we don't actually have anything written of 20s of 20s of 20s. That'd be a lot. So 18 months of 20 days gives us 360. There were 5 extra days thrown in. If you look at the illustration on the slide, they are on the left, those 5 circles. And these were definitely considered unlucky or ill-fated days. Bad days to be born, by the way. People would not let you forget that for the rest of your life. And then if you were alive and these days were coming, if possible, you might just want to hang out in your house for those 5 days. We actually don't know exactly how they adjusted their calendar because, as you might know, there are more than 365 days in a solar year. There are 365.2422. And although some professors in the past 30 years have suggested they just allowed the calendar to slip out of date, we're pretty sure that this is not what they did. We don't know when or how these days were added to keep the calendar straight, But as you can see, since this calendar was used for the physical world of when to plant and when to weed and when to harvest and when to irrigate and so on and so forth, this would not be a calendar that they could afford to be off the solar rotation of the Earth around the Sun of 365.2422 days. So maybe some of you in this class, you can go find out how they did that. If you were to find out how they did that, you'll have a pretty nice fat book and a good job as an archaeologist somewhere here in the United States or Mexico or somewhere else. So 365 days, 18 times 20 plus 5, that is their solar calendar. Their solar year would be a better way to put it. And this was one of their calendars. You do not have to go and learn these 18 months by heart. The second calendar is known as the Tonal Powali, and it is a ritual calendar. Interestingly, they have 20 months on this and 13 days. 13 is also a very prominent number, in the Valley of Mexico and in Mexican culture. So 13 times 20 provides you with 260 days. So these are calendars that deal with religion and the rituals necessary at the temples. So these were not tied to agriculture and rotations around the sun. So we've lifted one of the pages from the Codex Bourbonus, and it shows a month with 13 days. And if you look carefully at the very top day, you can see a number 13, and you have a snake, and below that you have a lizard, and below that you have a house, and then an alligator, and then if you skip down, you can get to a flower. And when I say skip down, is at the bottom of that vertical, we see the flower. Compare that to table 17.1. You can see that flower is at the bottom of the table, and then follows with alligator, wind, house, lizard, and snake, just like we see on this page from the ritual calendar. Now, each day of the 260 had multiple associations based on its number and the name of the day and which number it was within the 260. There were birds associated to each of these days. Various gods were associated with some of these days. Some gods would have more than one day in 260. Others would only have one. And likewise, numbers 1 through 13 especially were associated or combined with the birds, the gods, snake, lizard, house, alligator, and which month it was to create meaning within their ritual calendar. So many different gods needed nourishment from the temple, whether it be incense, various sacrifices are possible as well, and they were regulated by this calendar. The calendar round is the larger of these cycles. It is a 52-year cycle, and it happens to be the meeting point of really two main elements. First is those 365-day solar calendars and the 260-day ritual calendars, probably adjusted somewhat, we don't know how. They meet every 52 years. But on top of this, these years were counted as the 365-day calendar, not the 260. So see, they knew that was more closely associated to a year than 260. And as mentioned before in this class, then they numbered the years 1 through 13 and combined them, with 4 symbols, so that when you have 4 times 13, you get to a 50-year cycle. So on the right, we can see that this leader, if you go to the very top of the years on the left-hand side, you can see he ruled in 4 rabbit, 5 reed, 6 flint, 7 house, 8 rabbit, so on and so forth. The last one you can see down there at the bottom is 12 rabbit which would be followed by 13 read, if he happened to rule that long. I don't have that memorized to see if his years go down lower than that. So the calendar round combined with the other shorter calendars was another layer of meaning of fate and uncertainty, or certainty, or chaos, or victory, or defeat, or luck, or bad luck. These were all woven into all three of these calendars at once. So every once in a while, when the stars aligned, and I don't mean the stars in heaven, but these calendars align, you might hit an unlucky day that's unlucky on all three calendars. And the Mexica would consider that the unluckiest of the unlucky days. Likewise with luck, or combinations of luck or unluck, they would see that as important in knowing what to do. Now the solar and celestial observations often were the knowledge of them were controlled by the nobles like Netzahualpili and others, and especially priests who were paying attention to the skies, and they would make sure that these calendars were running correctly. On to hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics are certainly in the Americas prior to European contact. These hieroglyphics are the most advanced written or drawn language in the Americas. Now, that doesn't mean they're better. For example, if you have an oral language and an oral history among the Chumash of Santa Barbara, oral doesn't make it less important or less sophisticated or less civilized. The difference, of course, is that written down, if you know the language of the written down hieroglyphics, or as we have textual language, they can endure for more time in a certain form. But again, this doesn't make them better or worse or more civilized. So, and when we get to the Incas, you'll see they were getting close in a different way to a written language, but definitely not a textual one there either. So hieroglyphics are more than pictograms. They're not just pictures of stuff that happened, like we went out hunting this year and got cold or something like that. They are in fact drawings of actual items, and you're drawing the name of the item. This allows, as I suggested, for communication and language to be readable and shareable over wide areas and large amounts of time. For example, Chilapan is an altepet. There is a place called Chilapan. So when they want to write Chilapan, then they put a chili inside of a location, and that combined says the name. Now, I don't know what our pictogram of Spokane is, or Los Angeles. I'm from a city called Palos Verdes, which means green sticks in Spanish. So, of course, that's what we would see if we were writing the hieroglyphics in the Mexica world. We would put 2 or more green sticks, and it would not mean green sticks. Well, it would mean green sticks, but it would be the city of Palos Verdes. And same with the rest of these on the upper left. We won't do them all. Let's pick some fun ones. On Coatzinco, as you can see, the coat, as you're starting to learn from this class, is the snake. Zinco being the lower torso or the legs. And so snake legs is Coatzinco. But again, it refers to an actual area, and everyone who saw this pictogram would say Coatzinco in their name, and not thinking snake legs, but thinking of the altepet. Down on the lower right, we have some real fun ones taken from the Codex Mendoza. I like it. We have Cuitlahuac, probably my favorite altepet name. It means excrement or dung in the water. It was most likely in a very smelly part of the lake. So that's how it got its name, Cuitlahuac. If you're in Mexico City and in the Cuitlahuac neighborhood, of course it's just a barrio these days, just a neighborhood, then you'll have kind of a chuckle to yourself about how it's named Cuitlahuac. Xochimilco, the next one to the right, it means flower. And so you can see that is an altepet named flower. And on the far right we have chalco, which means jade. So they drew the jade, and that means the altepet chalco. So hieroglyphic writing was an elevated or advanced way of writing which allowed on paper communication to be more stable and not change from time to time as the oral histories retell it. This is better from an administrative point of view, especially if you're the imperial center and you're trying to keep track of conquered and dominated city-states and tribute and so on and so forth. On to the crafts. Stone carving was one of the most impressive and took the longest to master skills. People who were involved in this were called Tula, which was an honorific coming from the area. It's an older city, and so it would be a way, if you're saying you have the skills of Tula, that you are skilled at your work. And we tend to see gods, animals, skulls, masks, better said. And so you have secular stories being told and religious rituals and calendars being observed. And these were the two main areas in which you would see stone carving. Here on the right on this slide, we see Moctezuma II, or if you're getting really good at your Nahuatl, Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, the Tlaloani who was in charge when Cortez's expedition showed up. This is his coronation stone. It's kind of part of a throne that was part of a throne where he was sitting during his coronation earlier in the excuse me. Sorry, I had a cough there. So the coronation stone from early 1500s, and this would be, a good example of the craftsmanship involved in the artistic achievements that we still have from the Mexica and the Aztec period. Here's a side view of the coronation stone. You can see Huitzilopochtli on the left, and on the left-hand side of the sundial. On the right, the picture on the right, we have Coatlicue, the skirt of snakes, or snake skirt. This is one in the pantheon of gods. We haven't concentrated on her. She's very high up with the Lord and Lady of Dualities and the four sons, one of which is Huitzilopochtli. So this would be used for religious purposes. And she was a god who did create many celestial bodies. So kind of gives you, with the coronation stone and the skirt of snakes, you get an idea of the level of stone carving development that occurred by the 1500s. Gold and feathers and mosaics are mentioned in the book. I have a good example here from the museum. What we find is that these are highly desired items for not only the large religious complex of people that we learned about in the previous unit, or portion of this unit, but also for political statements and statements of nobility of social standing. So these were highly sought after. So feather workers were way up the scale of social status if they could do their work well. And you can see in your reading of how the artisans were able to use glues and a variety of techniques to get their feather working to look this good. Gold was also worked into a variety of items, though its volume is quite low compared to how some might envision, I don't know, large, complex, New World, Mexican Andean populations. The Incas used more gold than the Mexica did in their work. And that's just a matter of availability. Jade, rock crystal, amethyst, turquoise. This is going to be much more used as you can also see, feathers in the Mexica world. And in the mosaics, then those are the type of items you're going to find in the mosaics rather than silver and gold or precious stones or diamonds or something like that. And in the last section for this unit, I have oral literature with a question mark. Literature, whether this means written or not, is a philosophical question, which we in this class are not going to take on. I'm just going to bump into it here or there. What I'd like to point out is that oral storytelling had developed to a very fine art. This was a profession one would have. And again, nobles, like our opening story, Netzahualpili, those who were equipped and skilled at storytelling would be seen by the other nobles and the commoners as better people. And in this portion of the chapter, you can see that the oral stories that are being handed down are often about chronicles about the past. Who migrated where, who conquered who and where, when the Aztec Triple Alliance was born, and what did they do. So, for example, just before the Triple Alliance rose up, there was a Tepanecan leader who ruled the valley. His name was Tetzotzomoc, and in the 1420s, he went on large conquests with his armies and the armies of other Altepets. And one part of the story that's handed down from this period is that after conquering the Alculwa, where Texcoco was the main city-state of Alculwa, he stopped by all sorts of cities and asked the young men who the leader of Alculwa was, and of course they listed their Tlaloani, Texcoco, and he said wrong, and he had them killed. So we kind of have a slaughter of the innocents of the young men happening during this time according to the narratives being told by many different city-states. So as a modern historian, we can try and tease out these different narratives using a variety of criterion. We call it the criterion of multiple attestation, the criterion of dissimilarity, the criterion of embarrassment, and there's all sorts of criteria we use, and we can get a close idea of what happened, though it's not an exact one, which doesn't bother me as a historian whatsoever, because I know, what I do know is that in 1521, when the Spanish are seeking these narratives, I do know that this is what the narrators told the Spaniards. See, that's something, and there's something important in that. So, at any rate, an example of one of the narratives that were handed down as a chronicle, the migrations from Aztlan, the flaying of the Culhuacan princess, these would all be stories that would be told as histories, though they did not conceive of history perhaps the same way as you and I do. And it doesn't make your or my version of history any more or less important from theirs. It just functions differently. Poetry certainly was a big deal as well. They told the epic stories of conquest and formations of the world and the big meta histories, kind of like we talked about above in the previous bullet point. These are more have more literary quality and aren't as straightforward. It's the delivery of them as poems that makes them different. And then they had lyric poetry, which tried to put into words episodes of life, like, what's it like to fall in love, right? First love, a Romeo and Juliet experience, something along those lines. Or when love appears but it's forbidden, what happens to everyone? As life fades away and you see the end of life coming, what is that like? So on and so forth. And then they did bring some of this poetry to song, and they had specific ceremonies where they sang certain lyrics, and Sahagún and Duran give us good examples of these songs 40 to 60 years after the Spanish conquest. So in this chapter 7 of the book, and in unit 4.2, again, we can kind of piece together the developments in the intellectual and cultural and artistic worlds of the Mexica.